I'll say this: if they advocated for equal pay, I will advocate for equal effort. Hello, welcome back to everyone that's tuned into our channel, American Ultra Stock. Here we are again with another video to you guys, a bit different than the ones we typically put out. And before we get started, just want to re-emphasize how thankful and grateful we are for all of the new subscribers, all the people that have been commenting and making this channel community. We're so thankful for that. We're trying to keep consistency and bringing new content, exploring some new subjects as well. You see it right behind Braden, right there, the best American midfielder in Europe, Tanner Tessman, a legend, and Megan Rapinoe, who some may say is a legend herself, with the accolades that she has achieved. It's hard to argue, although she's not the most likable person in the game. I think that's a very kind way to describe her. But we will be discussing ultimately the men's and the women's national team. Not really a comparison, but discussing how both have been growing the sport. Thankfully, the sport has been picking up in the U.S., and I'm really thankful if the women played any part in that. So ultimately, there is a bit of a rivalry within the fan base. A lot of the men's fans don't like the women's, and vice versa. But just straight to the point, Braden, do you think, this is the first question, we're going to discuss the very free-flowing, but do you think that the women's national team is more relevant in the sport as a whole in the U.S. right now?
I think in the past, in the very recent past, that they were, because they're the most successful women's national team out there. They've won 4 World Cups and they've done tremendous things for the sport in the country. But the fact of the matter is, the rest of the world is finally catching up, and we saw that at the last World Cup. The women's national team for the U.S. is also going through a bit of a transition phase. All of the old legends like Abby Wambach, Carly Lloyd, Rapinoe, like you said, are getting transitioned out of the team, and the new generation is coming in. And it just so happens to coincide with the best USMNT generation that we've ever had. So I think that the interest in the USMNT is definitely a lot higher than the women's team just as of right now, because they're playing at a higher level, which is the first time that that's ever been able to be said in their respective sport. Of course, we know the men are better than the women if you compare them head to head. But yeah, I think the men's, for the first time, honestly, are actually on top in terms of relevancy in the country.
Yeah, I think in the country, that's a very fair take. It does push us to the next topic, really. You mentioned that there is a transition happening right there, and you can see even with transfers on how the rest of the world caught up, because we see some of our best players, like Fox, who is a fullback, really good player. She's been a part of the U.S. squad, and I definitely think she'll be part of the next World Cup cycle. And she moved to Arsenal. In the past, we would see the NWSL as the best league in the world, but now we're having exports, people going to Europe, and I think that it does benefit their game because the rest of the world has caught up with the emerging of all of these nations right now, turning their eyes and focusing, and even clubs. There is a growth in the women's game, which is nice to see, but even clubs are turning a lot more attention towards it. Do you think that the relevance, who's more relevant? Just straight to the point, who's more relevant in the world of soccer, really? Not in the country, but in the world game. Do you think that the men in their respective clubs and in their respective leagues in Europe play a more pivotal role than the women, the American women do? Do you think that today in the game people respect them a little bit more? Do you think that they're more relevant? I know that we're not supposed to divide, but it's our channel, we'll do whatever. Which one do you think is more relevant in terms of the world stage?
I think it's a very similar thing to the national team, because it's actually the same thing. At the club level, the NWSL was one of the best leagues in the world, and it's still up there. But we're starting to see, like I said, Europe is catching up, South America is catching up in terms of talent, and I think the Women's Super League in particular in England, it has probably emerged as the best women's league in the world. There's obviously teams as well like Barcelona and Lyon, who have been powerhouses in the women's game for quite some time, and we haven't seen any U.S. women's national team players make the step to those clubs, really. So I think the men's national team players are a bit ahead of the women, because their transition period to Europe has happened before. We see so many players now in Europe, and there's just going to be more coming. The women are finally starting to do that, but back in November when the women's roster was put out, the first team, there was only 3 players on it that were playing outside of the NWSL. And when you look at the USMNT roster, there's only 1 or 2 players included that are even still in MLS. So I think on the world stage, the men are definitely ahead, just like in the international stage as well.
Yeah, I agree. And again, we're not trying to be biased and create a divider here, just purely discussing a theme that I think that has crossed the minds of a lot of people that follow the sport and are USMNT fans, is strictly more watching towards the men's game. Let's be honest, there is more visibility right there. And again, not a divide, but why I think this thought has come across of somewhat comparing both sides is because of our federation is one of the first ones to implement equal pay. And I think it is a touchy subject, but it can be, it is something that we can hold accountable for why we even have the manager that we have in the men's game. We know that the federation is very committed towards the equal pay initiative. I think it's fair. I don't think that the player is opposed to it at all. Let's be honest, these guys make so much money already. So for them, it's not as big of a source of income as it is for the women. So I think on that side is fine. But when it comes to just the future of the USMNT, that's what our channel talks about mostly. Now that we see the women are progressing, do you think it is something that will hold us back, really, equal pay? Do you think we look at the, and I'm also going to leave in the description for some of the viewers if you are interested in the financial aspect of it, there are statements in the website of the USSF. It's really interesting to see the year that they stopped revealing which amount gets allocated to what. You see the last one that's available is the 2022. This is, for us, it's a public body as well, so we can criticize it if we want. But the decision to ultimately do it in an equal pay proportionate, do you think it is something that will hold us back? Do you think that it is a turnoff for some managers? Because let's face it, Greg was one of the lowest paid managers in the World Cup. What is your take on it?
First of all, I would just want to say that first part is a little bit of a myth. Yeah, Greg was actually, I have the list up here, he was the 13th highest paid manager at the World Cup, which, if you look at our performance, actually kind of suits it. I think we were about the 13th best team at the World Cup. I think that's a pretty fair spot. But for our aspirations for the future, we want to be a lot higher. And ultimately, the equal pay thing has been very beneficial for the women who are the ones pushing for it. They just hired one of the best women's managers in the world, Emma Hayes from Chelsea, absolutely world class in the women's game. So that's been good for them. But when it comes to the men, we're still stuck with Greg Berhalter, who in the women's game, I don't even know. I don't know enough about women's managers, but I'm trying to think of a comparison. But I'll just compare Emma Hayes to a men's manager. That's probably easier. She would probably be around, I don't know, Thomas Tuchel level, something like that. I think that's a decently fair comparison.
Maybe
and
higher. Maybe higher.
Honestly, yeah. Considering how poorly Tuchel's been doing with Bayern, but I picked the Chelsea manager who won the Champions League with them in 2021. I think around that level, Emma Hayes would be in the men's game. But yeah, Greg's a lot lower than that. We all know how poorly he's done at club level and some underwhelming results with the national team. And I think ultimately it will hold us back a little bit because the equal pay, it limits how much we can pay our managers. And a lot of USMNT fans have been very vocal about trying to get world-class managers who are out there, Zidane, Mourinho, managers of that quality, and they're not going to work for us if we're going to be paying them a very meh level salary, to be completely honest.
Absolutely. I think that you take what Hayes is getting paid right now. I don't know really the numbers, but I think that she would be at the very, definitely more, better than the 13th most well-paid coach in the women's game. I'll just a wild guess she would be amongst the top 5, really. And you look, she's getting more paid than Pia is getting paid in Brazil, and she was, I think, the 3rd best paid coach for a national team. So I don't know if things have changed, but she is definitely amongst the top 5. I don't think that we can attract, especially if we're going to keep the relative equal pay. I don't think that 1.5 million a year really attracts any top manager for the men's game. That is not trying to sound arrogant, but it is pennies for the game, really. These guys that could propel us to the next level and make the most of this generation that we have, which I think it is the first golden generation, if we want to call it, the first crop of players that are at a significantly better than the ones that we had in the past. And our floor of talents ratings getting so much higher. We have players in the bench right now that would be starters in the past decade, let's be honest. But in order to get a manager that would take the most out of the squad, it would take a lot more, and it would definitely break equal pay. And I also have my doubts on whether a Mourinho would be okay with the equal pay structure. Would he be a yes man to the USSF, which, let's face it, not trying to bash in the federation, but it is something that seem very appealing to them. I think it is how pro USSF Greg is, as opposed to how pro national team really in terms of results he is. I think he's more driven to honestly be buddies, perhaps, with the people inside, and just do as they say. It's a really good yes man. I don't think that a top manager would be okay with that. I don't know if that sounded too harsh, but what do you think, Brett? Do you think it is something in terms of ideas and the vision for the future? Do you think it would be diverging? Do you think a top level manager would be okay with equal pay? And again, what are your thoughts on it?
Absolutely not. And I did just look up the stats on the salary. Emma Hayes is now the highest paid women's manager in general, not just at national team level, club level as well. And national team managers tend to, at least in the men's game, make a lot less than club managers do. So if Berhalter is the 13th highest national team manager for salary, and keep in mind, there's some pretty big countries with big managers that didn't make the World Cup, such as Italy. So he's probably closer to 15th, maybe even a little bit lower in the national team space. Imagine how low he is when you include club managers. And the fact that Emma Hayes is the #1 in the world for women's kind of shows you where the USSF priorities are at. I think they've been with the U.S. women's national team over the men for quite some time now. And on the field, it kind of does make sense. I mean, they've won 4 World Cups. It makes sense to kind of parade around the team that's been performing better. But the fact of the matter is, U.S. Men's national team is more profitable and has the potential to be even more profitable if they do well. So if they look at money, and let's be honest, it's a business. So they should be looking at money, trying to improve the U.S. men's national team with maybe paying a little bit more on the manager will ultimately profit them a lot more in the long run. So I'm not really sure why they're continuing to stick with this equal pay model. And just to be clear, I'm not completely against equal pay as long as the women can make the revenue. As it stands, the men make a lot more money. I think it should be proportional, the same ratio, but based on the amount of money that they make.
Yeah, I'm completely okay with the equal pay, and I actually think I'm a little bit more amicable with how much they get paid, and I think it is impossible for them to generate the revenue that would be honestly justifiable, be a justifiable argument for equal pay. So I think it is okay to overpay, if you want to call it overpay them a little bit, and get it a little bit closer to bridge the gap between the men's game, because it is, let's be honest, the women's game does need more investment really, and more people to turn their eyes into, so these athletes can make a living and a good amount of money. I don't think it's ever going to reach the heights of the men, but it is necessary. But I'll say this: if they advocated for equal pay, I'll advocate for equal effort. That's what I'll say. I'll advocate for equal effort, because they're clearly trying to fix the problems in the women's game. We have our president is Cindy Parlow-Cone. She's a woman. Not to say that that's anything wrong, but I think that even in her resume, look at what she has done in the past, all these accolades with the women's game. And you see Matt Crocker, the first thing that he says, oh, the women's game has grown so much in the United States. We have a great president that was a player. I'll just advocate for equal effort. You don't need to go tomorrow and get the highest paid manager in the men's game. You just need to get a good one, one that that all of the squad, the fans will be excited about. We're not even asking right here for a world-class manager, just someone that can get us to punch above our weight. If we hired Hervé Renard, who, let's face it, we only know him because he beat Argentina, nobody would complain. I don't think that any fan would have a real hard time against him, because it would show the effort. You're trying to get someone to punch above our weight. And that's what I advocate for. That's really, we could touch on the NWSL or MLS, but I think that this is a better way to finish, just really talking about the equal effort. Do you agree with me? I think that it's not much to ask, really.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the priorities have been with the U.S. women's national team for a long time over the men's. And yeah, if they're going to get paid equally, which is fine, there needs to be equal effort. I completely agree. From the federation standpoint, there's definitely a lot more resources going into the women's than there should be comparatively to the men's. They are building the new training facility. I'm pretty sure that's for both sides of it. I think that's going to be a big help for both teams and the youth programs as well. But yeah, the manager, we already know it's the biggest problem. We already know it's not going to be fixed, but all we can do is continue to play.
Absolutely. And again, I think we're coming too close to our little comparison. I don't want this to really seem like a divide of both. I support the women's team when they are in the World Cup. I'm not going to lie, I do find it a bit enjoyable when some of the figures that were in that team, I'll say that war, because I think the new crop, they seem pretty likable. I don't really mind. I don't really mind seeing some of them suffer and say what they say. And I think karma did come around for some of them. But I will say this: we will be, if you guys enjoy it, this is a test, really. We did cover the Women's World Cup in the past, and it was a video that some people really enjoyed. If you find this enjoyable, again, we're really catering to our audience right here, trying some testing new waters right here to see if you guys enjoy it. We could do some of the transfer updates or talk about some of the players. There is a bit of a revival, like you said earlier, Braden. We have some players going to Europe that have a promising future going at a young age. We can discuss that or give updates. I don't really see much the women's national team being covered out there. So if you guys enjoy it, leave a comment. If you hate it, leave a comment. We would appreciate any criticism. We understand that it's a bit of a different topic, but regardless, thank you so much, Braden. Thank you for again posting the picture of the best American midfielder in Europe and the other players. By the way, just gonna leave on this note. That game, he did score a brace, so I think Tasman at 16 would definitely cut it at the women's game. But thank you so much. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and share with your friends. We'll see you next time.